Imagine this. A lone Philippine Coast Guard vessel crests a wave in the South China Sea at dawn, salt spray glinting in the early light. Its mission is routine: resupply a handful of Marines living on a rusting World War II-era ship deliberately grounded on a remote shoal. Suddenly, a white hull looms on the horizon, a China Coast Guard cutter nearly 3 times its size. A blaring siren and flashing lights accompany the cutter's approach. Without warning, a powerful water cannon erupts, pummeling the Philippine boat. Crewmen stagger as the torrent shatters the bridge windows. Equipment is knocked out and injuries are reported. The small vessel rolls helplessly in the onslaught, its radios sputtering. Now imagine that scene playing out differently next time. Flanking the Philippine boat are Allied ships from Japan and the United States, their presence a clear signal to the bully on the horizon. The water cannons fall silent. The standoff ends before it begins. How did this nimble, powerful bloc come together to contain China's maritime ambitions? How did the United States, Japan, and the Philippines form an Iron Triangle alliance to push back in the South China Sea? For years, the balance of power in Asian waters has been shifting, and not in favor of smaller nations. China's growing maritime assertiveness has fundamentally altered the strategic landscape in the Indo-Pacific. It has built and militarized artificial islands atop coral reefs in the South China Sea, deploying runways, radars, and missiles where once only turquoise waters lay. Heavily armed Chinese Coast Guard and maritime militia vessels now patrol disputed areas incessantly, challenging the sovereignty of other claimants. In the East China Sea, Chinese ships circle Japanese-administered islets. In the Taiwan Strait, Chinese warplanes test their neighbors' air defenses. And in the South China Sea, including waters internationally recognized as the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, Beijing asserts ownership through its expansive Nine-Line claim, a claim invalidated by an international tribunal in 2016, but still aggressively enforced by China on the water. Why does this moment matter? Because Beijing's actions have set off alarm bells across the region. The South China Sea is strategically vital, with roughly $3 trillion in goods shipping through each year, and is rich in fish and potential energy reserves. By fortifying positions and harassing foreign vessels, China seeks to make its de facto control a fait accompli. For countries like the Philippines, this trend strikes at both national pride and economic livelihood. Its fisherfolk are chased from their own fishing grounds, its offshore oil-gas prospects stalled by intimidation, and its navy outposts beleaguered. Philippine ships have routinely been shadowed and harassed by China's Coast Guard in areas like Scarborough Shoal and Second Thomas Shoal, within waters the Philippines claims by law. Each incident has been pushing Manila closer to a crossroads: accept a new era of diminished maritime rights, or push back with help from friends. Compounding the urgency, the Philippines' strategic posture has whiplashed in recent years. Under former President Rodrigo Duterte, 2016 to 2022, Manila tried a conciliatory approach to Beijing, downplaying the 2016 legal victory and distancing itself from its U.S. ally. The result? Minimal Chinese investment, continued militarization, and unabated bullying at sea. By contrast, the current president, Ferdinand "Bongbong" Marcos Jr., has pivoted sharply. Since taking office in mid-2022, Marcos Jr. has reinvigorated the U.S. alliance and sought new security partners. This policy U-turn set the stage for a trilateral alignment few would have imagined a decade ago, one that brings together America's oldest Pacific ally, the Philippines, its most powerful Asian ally, Japan, and the United States itself. Each leg of this emerging triangular security alliance has its own reasons for concern, and now, at last, they are linking arms. If long-term trends provided the kindling, China's recent maritime aggression was the spark that ignited the Iron Triangle. A series of provocations in 2023 to 2024 jolted the Philippines into action, and crystallized the need for tighter cooperation with Washington and Tokyo. Perhaps the most galvanizing incidents have been China's brazen use of force against Philippine vessels, in peacetime and within the Philippines' own waters. In February 2023, a Chinese Coast Guard ship aimed a military-grade laser at a Philippine patrol boat near 2nd Thomas Shoal, temporarily blinding crew and causing outrage in Manila. The Philippine leadership's response marked a turning point. Rather than quietly protest through diplomatic notes, the old approach, President Marcos Jr. ordered the release of photographs of the laser attack to the media. The public deserves to know, his national security advisor decided in an emergency meeting, and so began a campaign of transparency, exposing Chinese actions to sunlight. It was a calculated move to raise international awareness and impose severe costs on Beijing's reputation for its behavior. From that point on, each Chinese provocation only steeled Manila's resolve further. In August 2023, for example, Chinese ships blocked and blasted a Philippine resupply boat with water cannon, preventing it from reaching the dilapidated BRP Sierra Madre outpost at 2nd Thomas Shoal. Video of the incident, a powerful jet of water arcing from a Chinese vessel, slamming into the smaller Philippine boat, was released to the world, sparking global condemnation. US officials denounced the dangerous actions and reaffirmed that any attack on Philippine public vessels, yes, even a Coast Guard or supply boat, would invoke the US-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty. Japan's government, for its part, blasted the use of water cannons as undermining the safety of ship and crew and explicitly opposed any actions escalating tensions. Such statements of support were not lost on Manila. Then came the ramming incidents. In a highly alarming clash in June 2024, dozens of Chinese Coast Guard personnel, some wielding knives and axes, rammed a Philippine Navy boat during another 2nd Thomas Shoal resupply run. The melee resulted in one Filipino sailor losing a finger, marking the most violent skirmish in the area in years. Around the same time, Chinese ships were recorded placing a floating barrier to block Filipino fishermen from entering Scarborough Shoals Lagoon, another rich fishing area grabbed by China in 2012. In late 2023, near Scarborough, a Chinese vessel even collided with a Philippine boat, with each side trading accusations over the cause. These episodes drove home a frightening point. Left unchecked, China's grey zone harassment could turn deadly, whether by accident or design. A fatal accident could escalate into open hostilities, Philippine Ambassador José Manuel Romualdez warned. That keeps a lot of us awake at night. Crucially, each act of Chinese belligerence served to strengthen Manila's determination to bolster alliances. Every water cannon attack or hull scrape made headlines and underscored the imbalance the Philippines faced alone. Marcos Jr.'s government deftly used these incidents to rally international support. They invited foreign journalists on board their ships to document confrontations, and a Philippine Coast Guard spokesman began regularly taunting China on social media with video evidence of Chinese aggression. This transparency policy, as intended, garnered sympathy and statements of solidarity from many nations, not only the US and Japan, but also Australia, India, several European countries, and ASEAN neighbors. Most importantly, the Philippines reached out directly to its two closest security partners. In early 2023, just days after the laser incident, President Marcos granted the US military access to 4 additional Philippine bases, a major expansion of the country's defense pact that had stalled under Duterte. These new sites would allow US forces to rotate through strategic locations in the north and west of the Philippines, including one near the contested Spratly Islands and others facing Taiwan. Marcos also made high-profile visits to Washington and Tokyo to reaffirm security ties. In a historic first, on April 11, 2024, the leaders of the Philippines, Japan, and the US met together in a trilateral summit at the White House. There, President Biden reiterated America's ironclad commitment to Philippine defense, and all three leaders agreed to bolster maritime cooperation in the face of China's actions. What had been a loose idea of trilateral coordination suddenly became tangible. The Iron Triangle was beginning to take shape. Beijing, notably, took angry notice of this emerging triangle, calling it aimed at China, a telling sign that the new coalition was already being felt in Beijing's calculus. Perhaps the most remarkable element of this trilateral alignment is the role of Japan. After World War II, Japan famously adopted a pacifist constitution. For decades, it maintained only self-defense forces, SDF, with a strictly defensive mandate, and forswore any overseas military engagements. Japanese politicians often avoided even the appearance of joining foreign conflicts. Yet today, Japan is shedding elements of that post-war pacifism and stepping forward as a key security partner in Southeast Asia, including areas far from its home waters. How did this happen? In short, China's rise and regional provocations have compelled Tokyo to redefine its strategic posture, and the Philippines' plight has resonated strongly with Japanese leaders. It starts with Japan's own security environment. In Northeast Asia, Tokyo faces twin threats: an aggressive North Korea testing missiles and a territorially assertive China pressing claims to the Senkaku Islands, administered by Japan in the East China Sea. Chinese Coast Guard ships and aircraft intrude around the Senkakus on a near-daily basis in what Japan views as an effort to erode its control. Japan knows well the kind of pressure the Philippines faces. As one analysis put it, Japan is deeply familiar with the challenges to sovereignty that constant Chinese incursions pose. Moreover, any conflict over Taiwan, which lies between Japan and the Philippines, would almost certainly involve Japan. This shared strategic concern, maintaining a rules-based order against Chinese revisionism, has drawn Tokyo, Manila, and Washington into closer alignment. In response to growing threats, Japan has undertaken a landmark military build-up and policy shift in recent years. In late 2022, Tokyo approved new security strategies that include doubling defense spending to 2% of GDP within 5 years and acquiring longer-range strike capabilities, moves once unthinkable for the officially pacifist nation. It also loosened decades-old restrictions on defense exports and military cooperation. Under former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and his successors, Japan has embraced the concept of a free and open Indo-Pacific and recognized that its own security is intertwined with that of its neighbors. Japan's emergence as a proactive security partner has been striking. In fact, Japan quickly became one of the Philippines' most important security partners, as well as an economic partner. This is a sea change. Within living memory, Japan was the invader of the Philippines. Now it is providing ships and planes to help the Philippines defend itself. Concrete steps in the Japan-Philippines security relationship illustrate this pivot. As early as the 2010s, Japan started transferring maritime assets to the Philippines. It provided 10 brand new Coast Guard patrol vessels to the Philippines on concessional terms and leased TC-90 surveillance aircraft to help the Philippine Navy patrol its seas. These were significant departures from Japan's previous self-imposed limits. In 2013, after Typhoon Haiyan struck the Philippines, Japan sent an SDF disaster relief mission, its first major deployment of forces overseas since World War II, albeit for humanitarian aid. Tokyo also supported peacebuilding in the southern Philippines, Mindanao, putting boots on the ground in a non-combat role for the first time in a conflict zone. Each of these steps built confidence and familiarity between Japanese and Filipino forces. Then, in April 2023, Japan launched a new program called Official Security Assistance, OSA, essentially grant aid for defense equipment to like-minded countries. The Philippines was a top priority. Through OSA, Japan moved to donate a state-of-the-art air surveillance radar system to the Philippines to bolster its monitoring of the West Philippine Sea. By the end of 2024, Tokyo earmarked additional radars and at least 1.6 billion yen, over $10 million, in security aid to Manila, including coastal radar systems and inflatable boats to enhance Philippine maritime patrols. These are relatively modest sums, but symbolically powerful. Japan is directly enhancing another nation's military capabilities to check Beijing's moves. Japan's first international defense sale following landmark reforms was radars for the Philippines, analysts note, highlighting Manila as a proving ground for Tokyo's more assertive posture. Most dramatically, Japan and the Philippines agreed to a Reciprocal Access Agreement, RAA, a legal framework allowing their forces to deploy on each other's soil for joint training and exercises. This pact, signed by both governments in mid-2024, is Japan's first such agreement with any Asian country. Its only other RAAs are with Australia and the UK. In December 2024, the Philippine Senate unanimously ratified the RAA, with senators openly citing China's increasingly assertive stance as the impetus. By June 2025, Japan's Diet, Parliament, completed its ratification as well. The RAA will ease the entry of equipment and troops for everything from combat drills to disaster relief, smoothing military cooperation. In essence, it paves the way for Japanese troops to train on Philippine territory for the first time since World War II, a full-circle moment of historic significance. Japanese Prime Minister at the time, Fumio Kishida, welcomed the RAA, seeing the Philippines as a vital partner in a volatile region. Indeed, Tokyo's growing network of security ties, long anchored by the US-Japan alliance, now increasingly extends southward to nations like the Philippines, Australia, and Vietnam. Japan's pivot has not been without domestic debate. Many Japanese remain cautious about entanglement in distant conflicts, but there is broad recognition in Tokyo that standing up to coercion in the South China Sea today may prevent a larger conflagration tomorrow. As Japan's ambassador to Manila put it recently, Japan upholds the rule of law and opposes any actions which increase tensions in regional waters. By arming and training with the Philippines, Japan is effectively pushing back against China's attempt to carve out a sphere of influence through force. In doing so, Japan fortifies not only the Philippines' defenses, but also its own, since a more secure Southeast Asia contributes to a stable region amid China's aggression, which is exactly what Washington, Tokyo, and Manila are jointly aiming for. What does this burgeoning trilateral alliance look like in action? By mid-2025, it has moved beyond strategic pledges and into real-world operations on, above, and around the waters of the Philippines. Through joint exercises, expanded base access, and coordinated patrols, the US, Japan, and the Philippines are translating their partnership into a tangible deterrent presence. The message to Beijing is clear. Any further adventurism will not go unanswered. One of the earliest visible fruits of the alliance was a series of joint military drills and exercises. In June 2023, as tensions simmered, the three countries' coast guards launched their first-ever trilateral maritime exercises off the coast of Bataan, Philippines. In one dramatic simulation, Philippine Coast Guard personnel, backed by American and Japanese counterparts, boarded a vessel in a mock operation to intercept contraband weapons, facing down armed adversaries in the drill. The sight of Philippine, US, and Japanese ships and small boats maneuvering together was unprecedented. Over 500 Coast Guard personnel took part, practicing search and rescue, law enforcement, and anti-piracy scenarios. The symbolism was as important as the tactics. 3 flags flying side by side on the high seas, training to help each other. All the exercises we do, we help one another prepare for anything that may happen in the future, a Philippine Coast Guard spokesperson explained. Japan and the US, he noted, have been providing ships and training, and now we're seeing how much the Philippines had improved. Members of the Philippine Coast Guard aboard the BRP Melcora Aquino participate in a trilateral Coast Guard exercise with Japan and the US off Bataan, June 2023. Such joint drills aim to enhance search and rescue, law enforcement, and interoperability amid China's expanding maritime presence. These exercises quickly ramped up in scope. In 2024 and 2025, the annual US-Philippines Balikatan War Games, already one of Asia's largest military drills, grew even larger, and for the first time, included Japanese troops. Balikatan 2023 saw some 17,600 troops, American and Filipino, conducting live-fire exercises, coastal defense simulations, and even a boat sinking exercise, in a show of force meant to reassure the Philippines and warn China. By Balikatan 2025, at least 17,000 personnel were involved, now with hundreds of Japanese and Australian forces participating directly in combined operations. This multilateral dimension, Japan and Australia fighting side by side with US and Filipino forces on Philippine soil, would have been hard to imagine just a few years ago. It demonstrated a new level of interoperability. In one 2024 drill, Allied troops practiced an amphibious landing and air assault to retake an island, a scenario not so subtly reminiscent of repelling a forcible seizure of a Philippine-claimed shoal or island. Furthermore, for the first time, joint naval maneuvers were held inside the Philippines' exclusive economic zone during Balikatan 2024. The clear subtext, "We will jointly operate in these waters, and China's unlawful claims won't stop us." Parallel to these exercises, the US-Philippine alliance has deepened its integration through the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDCA, now supercharged to support the new triangle. EDCA, originally signed in 2014, allows US forces to rotate through and pre-position materiel at designated Philippine bases. For years it languished, but under Marcos Jr., it sprang to life. In 2023, the Philippines increased EDCA sites from 5 to 9, granting US access to key locations. Bases in northern Luzon near Taiwan and Palawan facing the Spratly Islands among others. These sites are being upgraded with US funding, over $100 million committed, to store defense equipment, build runways, port facilities, and training infrastructure. Already, US military presence in the Philippines is the highest in decades, albeit still on a rotational, not permanent basing basis. American fighter jets and naval patrol planes have begun operating out of Philippine airfields on temporary deployments, significantly cutting response times to any South China Sea flare-up. US Coast Guard cutters have also conducted training and patrols alongside their Philippine and Japanese counterparts, blurring the line between exercises and real-world deterrence patrols. Another concrete manifestation of the trilateral alliance is joint patrols in contested waters. In late 2023, after a particularly dangerous Chinese maneuver that led to a collision with a Philippine boat, the Philippines for the first time invited Allied navies to patrol together in the West Philippine Sea, the Philippine term for its part of the South China Sea. By November 2023, Philippine, US, Japanese, and even Australian vessels sailed in formation on a joint patrol near Scarborough Shoal, a flashpoint area about 120 nautical miles off Luzon that China has controlled since 2012. The United Patrol sent a strong signal. It upheld the right to freedom of navigation and overflight in those waters and pushed back against China's unilateral assertions. Notably, a US Navy P-8 Poseidon aircraft provided overwatch while a Japanese destroyer and Philippine vessels patrolled below. Although these were limited patrols, they are expected to become more regular. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan confirmed in April 2024 that more joint patrols can be expected in the South China Sea, following combined drills by the four countries. The strategic logic is simple. When Chinese ships know they might face not just the Philippine Coast Guard, but also US and Japanese naval power, their calculus changes. Beyond patrols and drills, the trilateral cooperation extends to capability building and infrastructure support that strengthen deterrence. Japan's contribution here is noteworthy. Tokyo provided the Philippines with 4 advanced Coast Guard radar systems, enabling better maritime domain awareness, and has trained hundreds of Philippine Coast Guard personnel. It also transferred freezer containers and dredging equipment to improve the living conditions and maintain the sandbar at the Sierra Madre outpost. Small things that help the Filipinos hold their ground at 2nd Thomas Shoal. Meanwhile, the United States has been helping upgrade Philippine military facilities under EDCA, constructing warehouses, command centers, and training ranges that will allow rapid deployment of forces in a crisis. Washington also increased foreign military financing to the Philippines, facilitating the purchase of new surveillance drones, helicopters, and coastal defense missiles. And in a truly joint endeavor, Japan and the US are coordinating on technology and infrastructure projects for the Philippines, for instance, exploring how to network Philippine coastal radars with Japanese and American systems for a unified picture of Chinese ship movements. There's also talk of involving the Philippines in AUKUS-related technology cooperation, such as maritime drone development, indicating the triangle is plugging into broader regional initiatives. All these efforts, exercises, patrols, base access, arms aid, add up to a strategy of deterrence by presence. The Allies are operationalizing their alliance to convince Beijing that coercion will be met with collective pushback, not isolated protests. Already there are signs this is having an effect. Filipino officials observe that while Chinese harassment continues, it remains mostly at the water cannon and blocking level, as if Beijing is wary of crossing a line that would trigger US intervention. China has few escalatory options left without triggering the US-Philippines Defense Treaty, notes Ian Story of Isaias Yusof Ishak Institute, given the new international spotlight and allied presence. In other words, the Iron Triangle may be starting to blunt China's grey zone tactics by raising the stakes. To maintain this deterrent effect, the 3 partners know they must keep up the tempo, continuing routinized drills, patrols, and planning. As a US Institute of Peace brief put it, the speed with which this triad has developed is impressive, but now it must be sustained and made routine. If they succeed, a Chinese Coast Guard captain in the South China Sea will think twice before spraying that next water cannon or nudging his ship into a risky collision course, knowing it might provoke not just the Philippines but a multi-nation response. It's worth asking, why pin hopes on a trilateral alliance? After all, there are larger multilateral groupings in the Indo-Pacific, notably ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and the Quad, US, Japan, India, Australia, that also aim for regional stability. What makes this smaller minilateral pact potentially more agile and impactful than those broader forums? The answer lies in focus and cohesion. Sometimes, a tight-knit team with a clear mission can act faster and more decisively than a big committee trying to please everyone. Start with ASEAN, which includes the Philippines and 9 other Southeast Asian states. ASEAN operates by consensus and emphasizes unity, but that very nature limits its ability to confront China. The organization has been negotiating a code of conduct with China for the South China Sea for over 2 decades, with little progress to show. Any strong language is often watered down by members more aligned with Beijing's views, e.g., Cambodia, Laos. Getting all 10 countries, from staunch US ally Singapore to China-leaning Cambodia, to agree on robust collective action against Chinese maritime encroachments has proven nearly impossible. Indeed, aside from the Philippines, most Southeast Asian states still hedge between Washington and Beijing, avoiding firm alignment. Even Vietnam, which shares Philippine concerns about China, balances its new comprehensive strategic partnership with the US by simultaneously deepening ties with China. In this context, expecting ASEAN to jointly patrol the South China Sea or invoke mutual defense is unrealistic. By contrast, the US-Japan-Philippines triad is a coalition of the willing and the able. It sidesteps ASEAN's internal divisions by uniting just the most forward-leaning players on this issue. As one commentator noted, Manila's clear alignment with Washington and Tokyo is exceptional in Southeast Asia, and other Southeast Asian states are not expected to follow suit anytime soon. That's precisely why this trilateral needed to form, to do what ASEAN as a whole cannot. What about the Quad? The Quad, US, Japan, India, Australia, is another important minilateral which gets a lot of attention as a counterweight to China. It certainly has strategic weight, including India's huge population and Australia's geographical reach. However, the Quad's scope is broader, covering everything from vaccines to infrastructure, and it lacks the tight focus on the South China Sea that the Iron Triangle has. India, in particular, has a more ambivalent stance on China's maritime disputes in East Asia. New Delhi is locked in its own border standoffs with China in the Himalayas, but it has traditionally been reluctant to involve itself militarily in the South China Sea, partly to avoid provoking China and partly because its navy's priority is the Indian Ocean. Thus, the Quad has not engaged in joint freedom of navigation patrols or collective security commitments in the South China Sea. Its members also have varying threat perceptions. For example, India's and Australia's immediate security concerns differ from Japan's and the Philippines. In contrast, the US, Japan, and the Philippines share a singular, urgent concern: Chinese expansionism in the Western Pacific, and specifically Beijing's attempts to control the waters around the Philippines, Taiwan, and Japan. All three are treaty allies among themselves, the US being the hub connecting the spokes, which the Quad notably is not. As such, the level of military interoperability and trust is higher in the triangle. The US and Japan have exercised and planned together for decades. The US and Philippines have a mutual defense treaty and a history of joint operations. Japan and the Philippines are rapidly catching up with drills and agreements. This creates a more solid foundation to actually undertake joint deterrence activities, versus the Quad, which remains a diplomatic coordination mechanism, with each country acting largely in parallel rather than jointly. Furthermore, minilaterals like this triad can be nimble. With just 3 countries, scheduling meetings, sharing intelligence, and making decisions can happen more quickly than in larger groups. There's also a clarity of purpose: contain Chinese maritime aggression in East and Southeast Asia. Other partnerships often juggle multiple goals. ASEAN prioritizes economic integration and consensus diplomacy. The Quad invests in public goods like vaccine distribution and emerging tech governance, alongside security. The Iron Triangle has one big mission: uphold the regional status quo against unilateral Chinese changes, and each member brings complementary strengths to that mission. The Philippines contributes crucial geography and legitimacy as the aggrieved coastal state enforcing its maritime rights. Japan contributes significant naval coast guard capabilities and regional influence as Asia's richest democracy. And the United States contributes superpower muscle and a global alliance network. Together, they form a tight latticework of alliances and partnerships that US strategists see as essential to check China. In fact, US policy in recent years has been to encourage such latticework, stitching bilateral ties into trilateral and quadrilateral formats. We see this not only with the US-Japan-Philippines triad, but also the US-Japan-South Korea trio, enhanced to address North Korean and Chinese threats in Northeast Asia, and the AUKUS partnership, US, UK, Australia, focusing on military tech in the Indo-Pacific. Each minilateral addresses a piece of the puzzle with fewer bureaucratic hurdles than, say, trying to get a formal NATO-like alliance of a dozen Indo-Pacific nations. Of course, none of this is to discount the importance of broader groupings. ASEAN will remain central to regional diplomacy, and its inclusive approach keeps China engaged in dialogue. The Quad provides a platform for the region's major democracies, including India, to synchronize broader strategy and economics. But when it comes to on-the-water deterrence in the South China Sea, This slim trilateral has an edge. It is action-oriented. We have already seen it conduct joint Coast Guard drills, coordinate quadrilateral naval activities with Australia, and issue unified warnings to Beijing after incidents. None of those things happened through ASEAN or the Quad. In a way, the Iron Triangle acts as a force multiplier for the existing alliance system. It networks America's separate alliances with Japan and the Philippines into a more effective combined front. The Biden administration explicitly pursued this. At the April 2024 summit, the joint vision statement from the three leaders spoke of building a stronger networked security architecture for the Indo-Pacific. Rather than rely solely on large, sometimes unwieldy coalitions, the idea is to form focused networks of allies who can address specific challenges. The US-Japan-Philippines partnership is exactly that for the challenge of Chinese maritime coercion. In sum, while ASEAN struggles for consensus and the Quad moves deliberately, the nascent Iron Triangle can respond to events in near real time. ASEAN might release a soft statement of concern on a South China Sea incident. The Triad can jointly sail a Coast Guard cutter through the area that same week. The Quad might discuss infrastructure investment. The Triad can plan out coordinated radar coverage or joint air patrols. There's a certain liberating efficiency in having the right players at the table, and no one else. To be clear, this alliance is not about supplanting ASEAN or the Quad. It's complementary. The Philippines still works within ASEAN and values Southeast Asian solidarity. Japan and the US still engage the region multilaterally. But when push comes to shove at a contested shoal, a smaller coalition of committed allies may be the only workable option to enforce international law, like the 2016 arbitral ruling, on the water. In the long run, if this Iron Triangle proves effective, it could even inspire similar minilateral approaches, perhaps nudging other partners, like Australia or Vietnam, to plug into flexible coalitions to uphold the rules at sea.